Thanks. Hello, Tim Mayer here, coming to you from Jaltipan in southern Veracruz, in Mexico, where it's a steamy 102 degrees in the middle. It's three o'clock in the afternoon here, and the height of the heat of the day. So we got to dress appropriately for that. I've been living in Mexico for about 9 years now, and one of the best decisions I've made in my life was coming here. I'm actually with my recently formalized in-laws, and um, this week is kind of it's sort of a music camp for the regional style of music, and so I've been incorporating myself into this regional style of music, trying to learn as much as I can. I've done that with African music, with Cape Verdean music, with Latin music as well, and of course, jazz is always the main focus of what I do. Um, Before I really get into things here, though, I do want to give a huge thanks to Gail Boyd for having me here today. It's great to finally be here, and also to Frank Moten of our gig and JLP. Um, he's behind the release of my newest project, which is called Standards, an album coming out on JLP on April 28th. So keep an eye out for that. Um, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. I guess I should back up a bit and tell people how I got into jazz. And it started off at the tender age of 4 when I learned how to work my parents' record player. Um, they they had bought me records like Peter and the Wolf, Sesame Street, Electric Company, Mr. Rogers, all the usual sorts of things for kids. But my favorite records were Bill Evans' Moonbeams, uh, Wes Montgomery, A Day in the Life, and Ahmad Jamal, Live at the Pershing. Those are my three favorites. As soon as they weren't in the room, I would pull off my record and put one of those on. It was about like this, proportionally, as a 4-year-old. So uh, that's I listened to those constantly, and then when I finally got my own record player, one of the first records that I was given was um, Sophisticated Giant by Dexter Gordon, and just the writing on that, the playing, everything just blew me away. That was when I was 13. I got my first record player, and interestingly, uh, the pianist on that record was George Cables. So put a pin in that. We're going to cycle back around to that. Everything in life is a spiral, and so um, I studied at Berklee. Bill Pierce was definitely my favorite and most influential teacher there. Um, we have a friendship that continues to this day, and one of the favorite things that kind of came out of that was a project that we had. Um, it was a two tenor tribute to two and then three tenors, um, tribute to the Boss Tenors and the Eddie Lockjaw Davis, Johnny Griffin material. So we had a bunch of that worked up, and eventually added a third voice to that, and that was so much fun to play that, pull out all those tunes and those arrangements, and then eventually I stayed in Boston, having graduated from Berklee, and was working with a lot of um, local and international people that came through, and finally in 2008 I met Michael Dees. We were touring a release of an Exotica album with a band called Waitiki that's now based in Honolulu. And so Michael had made friends with Randy Wong, the band leader, and so he was in on this album, contributed an arrangement, and played on a few of the tunes. And he asked me, "Have you ever thought about making your own CD?" And I thought, well, yeah, I've thought about it, but I just, it's hard to know where to begin. So he said, well, let's put something together. And so we started a series of conversations, and came up with some material and some ideas about musicians. And so he got me George Cables as my pianist. So that was George Cables, Desron Douglas, and Willie Jones III in the rhythm section, and Mike on trombone. We had Mark Whitfield guest for a couple of tunes, and in the trumpets we had a few different ones. Dominic Farnacci played on a tune or two, and then Claudio Roditi was on a few more. And yeah, it was just a wonderful experience making that record. And then so Mike says to me, he says, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's take this to John Lee and have him mix it." He said, "The worst thing that can happen is you'll get a great mix. And you never know, maybe he'll even pick up the project." So sure enough, we took it to John, and he started mixing it in his studio. And one day he calls me in and he says, "Hey, I really like this project. What would you say if we put it out on JLP?" And I was extremely ecstatic. That was like a real feeling of having finally getting that kind of validation for a life's work. Having something out on a label like that, where so many people that I knew of and respected, and some people that I knew and had gotten to know were involved in that. And that was so that came out in 2011. And that's really, like, now Standards is kind of the completing its own cycle. Just a follow-up with Standards, with Resilience was the name of that record, with George Cables and Desron Douglas and Mike Dees. And so that came out in 2011. And just a couple of years ago, out of the blue, Frank Moten calls me and he says, "Hey, your album Resilience is blowing up on the streaming platforms." Yeah, on Apple Music it has it's getting, last week it had as many reproductions in the week as it's had in its lifetime. So apparently it had made it to a playlist on Apple Music, Pure Jazz, which meant that it was getting 2, 3, even 4,000 plays a week. So now it's well over 100,000 plays. It's fallen off the playlist after about a year and a half, but it's still getting quite a few plays, and that's kind of paved the way for for standards. I guess I should lay some groundwork for how standards was came about. Um, so during my time in Boston, the uh, the gig scene there, locally, regionally, things were kind of starting to drop off. Um, I started going to Key West. Um, First, it was just once a year, and then and do a few gigs, and then come back. And that each time I went, I'd make more connections, get more gigs, stay longer, have more fun. Key West is it's a delightful place. I don't, I'm kind of hesitant to let the secret out, but um, it's the culture there musically. It draws a lot from the same elements, similar elements to New Orleans, but it's a tiny city. But there's more music there per capita, I think, than just about anywhere. Um, so uh, like funerals there, that's a source of gigs. There's a lot of um, uh, funerals are very similar to New Orleans. You have a band that accompanies the funeral party to the cemetery. You play kind of a slower dirge kind of thing, and then the second line going back um, to celebrate life. And jazz has been a big thing there for many years. People might not know this, but it's the birthplace of the great Fats Navarro. There have been many other great musicians that have gone through. Um, some have stayed for a while. Kenny Drew Jr. was there for a while. Um, a lot of other people. Michael Gillis, who recently passed away, was a fixture there. He's a great guitar player. Bassist Lonnie Jacobson, who has since passed away too. But there's a bit of a scene there. So it's definitely a place to go. A lot of other music there besides jazz, of course. Um, but that makes it just the culture, the people. Um, it's a wonderful place to visit. And so uh, by this time, I'm going maybe 2, 3 times, 4 times a year. And one of the gigs that I used to do was there's a resort, a 5-star resort called Little Palm Island, and Philip Sampson is the music director out there, and he would have people come out. He'd always have like a drummer, a singer. He plays a keyboard, a split keyboard, so he's doing bass and piano at the same time. And so he had Carlos Avaroff Sr. was one of his early guests. He was a Cuban saxophonist who was one of the original people in Irakere, the Cuban group. He was living up in Miami, passed away just a couple of years ago. And there's a Spanish saxophonist. His name is slipping my mind now, but I'll get back, circle back to that. But anyway, Phil would record many nights. So I started doing that gig in probably 2009 or so. I was doing it fairly regularly. So actually, the tracks from Standards our selections a trio with Phil and any one of three different drummers. Skipper Krippitz, who was originally from Atlantic City, Don Gauk, who is from Cleveland, and another local drummer, Matthew Watson, who just passed away a few years ago. And so it's a basically you're playing to a small room of people, but the music is being broadcast over speakers to this entire island. The whole island takes maybe 5 minutes to walk across, and uh, it's a really remarkable setting to be playing. And so the music is, Phil loves to play some of the less well known standards. He loves digging up these musical treasures, and so that's what a lot of this album is. There's a few really well known ones, and then the rest are some of these just remarkable compositions. And so I don't want to give too much away, so that you'll all check that out. Um, and of course, comes time to plug my website, timmayermusic.com. You can get information there, where I'm playing, what's going on. Uh, Standards will be mentioned up there prominently, and so that's where to go if you have any anything you want to know. The usual website stuff you'll find up there. Um, so um, I did the mixing, the mastering. Phil did the recording engineering. I did the mastering, and the artwork was done by Frank Moten. So that's definitely a really exciting thing. There'll be forthcoming beyond that. There'll be an EP of other music that came out of those sessions that I think was just too good to pass up. So let's see. Oh, how did I end up in Mexico? Well, first, I was teaching at Berkeley during the time of the recording of Resilience. Teaching there and seeing things kind of over time, gigs are kind of getting thinner in and around Boston. And actually, one thing that was a great experience was the Giants of Jazz Festival. This was in 2012, I think it was 2012. And that's, of course, one that John Lee produces in West Orange, South Orange. And at that festival, each edition of the festival honors some great artist who has made notable contributions to the music. And so that year's designated honoree was none other than George Coleman, who is definitely another one of my all-time favorite saxophonists. And so that was the rhythm section. There was Harold Mayburn, John Weber, and Joe Farnsworth. And so the John, it was a whole, like, probably 20 different horn players all assembled there. Don Braden, Mike Deese, Sherelle Cassidy, myself. But the two main guys up front were going to be Eric Alexander and Roy Hargrove. So John says, "Hey, here's what we're gonna do. Um, when you hear, so Roy's gonna take the first solo. When you hear Eric take the second bridge, take the bridge on his second chorus, you guys come in from the lobby and all come marching in towards the stage, and everybody take two choruses." And it was just, uh, man, two choruses for none other than George Coleman. So, it comes time, and I'm standing on the stage right behind Harold Mayburn, and man, every chorus he conned, every single one. I went kind of towards the end uh, in the long list of the long line of soloists, so I got to really see and hear him. Every single chorus was different. I tell you, that was just spectacular. And those guys really gave it. There was no flagging, there was no slacking, there was no complaining. I mean, that rhythm section, there was a puddle under Joe Farnsworth's throne. Those guys did not let up a bit. So you had to come in hitting hard, give it your all for two choruses, and then the next one came in, and then everybody played the head out. And uh, you could see George Coleman in the front row there with this really, that serious look he has, and just internalizing every note, absorbing everything, taking it all in. Man, that was really something. And and then on the break, I'm hearing we're all backstage, and uh, you hear all these different conversations, and I could hear Harold Mayburn talking about like he was just like an etymologist of musical phrases. This guy knew where every phrase, every melodic phrase in jazz came from, and he'd say, "Well, there's this phrase that you'll hear it in All the Things You Are, but it really came from this other composition, which came before that, which was borrowed from this classical work, and it goes, but that was actually borrowed from this other classical work that goes back to the late 18th century." He knew all of this stuff, but the real, for me, I think that was the high point of that whole experience was sitting up in the upstairs dressing room. It was just Jimmy Heath, George Coleman, and myself, all ears, listening to these guys exchange old battle stories about clubs they played and rhythm sections they played with, and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, uh, George says, "Hey, wait a minute, who's that playing right now?" And uh, and Jimmy says, "Oh, that's that Frank West. He's Mona's favorite saxophonist. Every time his music comes on the radio," and she says, "Jimmy, who is that?" And that's Frank West. And that was, you could feel the warmth there, the humor, um, the connection between all of those players. That was definitely a special moment. So that was right before I got a call. Basically, a good friend, Rafael Alcala, who's a pianist I had met in Boston. Um, hadn't heard from him in a few years. All of a sudden, he calls me out of the blue and he says, "Hey, Tim, uh, how would you feel about coming to Mexico to teach? We can revolutionize jazz education together here." And I said, "Well, I mean, that sounds pretty good, but I'm still under contract here at Berkeley, and um, I don't know. he says, "Well, I tell you what, come check the school out, and we'll see what you know. We'll see how things go." So that year, I did. I came and I did a weekend worth of workshops and um, checked the school. The school is a pretty amazing place. It's uh, kind of Spartan facilities compared to Berkeley, but the students are uh, really motivated, hungry for knowledge. Um, Definitely happy to see people there uh, who come to share their knowledge, and so um, oh, there we go. I think I'm back. Yes. So then the offer came to be the school's first um, artist in residence. So that was going to be 2 months where I'd be giving a whole series of master classes um, focused on all kinds of things from jazz history to improvisation clinics and technique for saxophone. And it was just a wonderful experience. Had a great time. And then at the end of that 2 months, they said, "How would you like to come back in August as a full time professor?" And at that point, I was ready to make the jump. So that was 2014. Um, and I taught there for a number of years, for about a good 4 or 5 years. And of course, like anywhere, they require you to get a master's degree. So I actually looked at a bunch of places up in the states. I looked at uh, uh, Juilliard. Steve Teray got me an interview there, and uh, Mike was trying to hook me up with the program at Michigan State. Everything looked great there, but I ended up going for a master's in post-tonal composition at Universidad Veracruzana, Veracruz University. Um, and there were a couple of reasons for that. One is at my age, it didn't make sense to go into debt for an advanced degree. Um, the other, uh, one of the advantages here is that I could keep working and I could keep doing what I was doing at the school and still work towards my degree. So I ended up doing that, deciding in the second year that I had to quit work. But there's a national scholarship here that that basically gives you a stipend every month um, that that enables you to pay the tuition. And I actually, at the end of that year, I had money saved up, so that kind of bridged that transition. And my my uh, my thesis project was a serial composition in 5 movements for saxophone quartet. So uh, I ended up recording that myself. In the whole process of that, I decided I needed to have a recording studio. So now I have that. I have music that I'm producing, and um, actually, Standards is one of those. I'll have another project coming up at the end of the year. Um, uh, Island Time. I'll give more information about that later. That's coming out on the Conktown Records label. It's a local Key West uh, record label. But for now, Standards. It's all about standards. So uh, it, thank you so much to Gail for having me. Um, it's been great. Can't believe I just talked my head off for half an hour. Hope it it was all engaging and fun. It was for me. So I'll say saludos from Mexico, and we'll see you again. I'll be up in the Northeast over the summer, so we'll see you around New York in June, July, and be in Honolulu for August. But thanks again. Thanks, Frank Moten, JLP, and I look forward to seeing you around soon.